welcome to ThoughtQuest's first episode of Black Lives Matter series. Today we'll be joined with our amazing guests who will be touching on Black Lives Matter movement, the unfortunate deaths we've all witnessed here in the UK and America. Cami and I will be bringing you questions on systematic racism and its presence within the police force, workplace environments and education, and ways in which, as a human race, we can practically break down racism and police brutality. I'd just like to firstly make clear to you guys and for our viewers that this conversation is inclusive. So although this episode centers on Black Lives Matter, we are a community podcast that we feel it's important to have non-Black people who are in support of this movement involved too. And we want to just say that there's no right or wrong answers that will be expressed today. We all know this topic is very complex and there's loads of things to deep. So yeah, just having said that, just wanted that make clear to everyone. So I hope you guys understand. Firstly, I would like you guys to just introduce yourself so that obviously each of you guys know who's who. That would be great. So who wants to start for us?
Yeah, I can start. My name's Lucas, and a year ago I just finished a psychology degree at Bath. And since then I've kind of been trying to transition a bit into filmmaking. So I've just kind of been dabbling a bit with more kind of creative stuff. And yeah, I was born and raised in London, half Spanish, half English, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
My name's Natalie, and I've just finished uni. I was studying journalism at Roehampton.
Alfan here, and I just finished my law degree at the University of Westminster. And kind of at the moment looking into how I can maximize my skills and everything that I have learned in and out of university.
I'm Zach. I also just graduated. Yeah, I don't really do much else. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you guys. Thank you. Cami?
So yeah, I just want to start off with how did everyone feel coming on to this platform to discuss this? I know for myself, I do have like this awareness that there's like almost like a political correctness that needs to go around it, and there's also that conversation I'm having with myself that this is just a conversation that needs to be had, coming from a space of it being like empty and meaningless, and let's resolve something and create something for the future. So I know there's a lot of conversations I'm having with myself, and so I'm wondering if you guys are going through that too.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, obviously, like, yeah, it is kind of hard with any subject to kind of have more of a kind of, I don't know, I guess more of like a formal discussion on it, just because obviously it's important to kind of also feel confident that you know what you're talking about. So I was kind of a bit aware that, like, with a conversation with friends and stuff, I might kind of say things that maybe I haven't done the necessary research behind it. So it's just a bit more kind of, I don't know, it's a bit harder, I guess, because you have to actually kind of present yourself in a way that you feel is kind of doing the conversation justice in a sense. So but it's good to have these conversations because it does promote you to kind of do a bit more looking around and look into things that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise. But yeah.
I would say, if I can add to that as well, that I think the fact that it's not spoken about in society as well, in common language as well, we haven't gotten to a point in society where we can talk about sensitive things without them being politically correct to the point where it's like we're almost not even talking about it anymore, and so we end up just dabbling around topics like this. So I think this George Floyd situation kind of like exploited something that was the elephant in the room, which allowed it for people who even weren't kind of like in proximity to the context of what that means, they can now be kind of exposed to it and then engage with other people to learn more. And I think that's what this will innate.
Yeah, just to go back to what Lucas said, yeah, it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had. And again, with like political correctness and stuff like that, it's difficult sometimes. I think for everybody to join in on the conversation. Some people might want to have opinions and might want to talk about certain situations, but I feel like people are worried at this point now, especially because people keep being called out and stuff and things like that. People are worried that they'll say the wrong things, offend people. But the truth is the conversation does need to be had regardless of how you do it. So there's no point of tiptoeing around it.
I think you only have to worry about things like political correctness when you like don't really care. Because if you did really care, like people could just be like, yeah, I understand he doesn't get it. We can have this discussion. But like when you start worrying about like optics outside of that, then it's becomes like slightly disingenuous.
If I could just add, actually, Kia, just based on the thing how you said, kind of it's a very complex issue and it's important to kind of discuss it as such. I think with any kind of social issue, whether it be Black Lives Matter, whether it be feminism, whether it be trans rights, whatever kind of social justice issue is at the heart of it, I think it's just important to remember that these are very, very complex issues. And yeah, there may be some senses in which everyone kind of has common ground, but there's always bound to be at least some small things in which people disagree with. And one thing I'm a bit worried about, kind of general in the political and social climate nowadays, is that some things tend to be, the way I see it, a little bit kind of oversimplified, such that if you deviate even a little bit here and there, it's kind of like, it kind of creates a bit of polarization. And I think it's very healthy to sit with people that you might disagree with on certain things and be able to talk in a civilized, kind of mature way. So I worry that that's slightly lacking a little bit, kind of across the board nowadays. But yeah, hopefully we can do just that.
Thank you. No, I totally hear that. Like, to be able to have civil conversation, because obviously not everybody will agree on what's being said. You have a right to agree, to disagree. But yeah, so I would like to start off this conversation with the Black Lives Matter movement. Just want to get a full of how you guys feel about that, your attitude towards it. Are you guys fully aware, like, how it came about, how it was started? So it was founded by 3 Black women in America, and they said on the website that it's an organised movement advocating for non-violent civil disobedience in protest against incidents of police brutality against Black people. So this movement began in 2013 after the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the shooting of African-American teen Trayvon Martin in February 2012. Having said that, are you guys like clear in terms of who they are, what's their approach, what they want to achieve? Because I feel like sometimes there can be a bit confusion around that. I know me and Camille have had discussions on that. I don't know if anyone's feeling that way.
I have no idea like who the London BLM people are or like what they do. Like I have no idea who those people are. I don't even know if they like organise the protests, but I'm in the dark with the UK BLM group. I don't really know what they do.
Same over here, and even generally, kind of, I've like that kind of origin of it, I wasn't really particularly aware of, but I've kind of just seen it more as like, it's almost a bit of like an umbrella term in the sense that there's a lot of, it's almost like a bit of a social media trend in that a lot of people are kind of, in that sense, it's a bit of a strange movement as compared to kind of historic movements, in that it's kind of, it almost lacks a bit less structure than some previous movements, in that a lot of people are citing it and claiming their acts or whatever they say to be under that umbrella term. But as a result, I'm seeing, at least on social media, at least on my page, a lot of people that seemingly are saying quite contradictory things, both of which are under the umbrella term of Black Lives Matter. So for me, just because it's a social media kind of phenomenon, at least, even though that may not be the origin, I'm a bit confused as to what exactly Black Lives Matter stands for, like, exactly, because it tends to be a bit more elusive sometimes. But.
Yeah, I hear that. Because I'm just looking at it now, like, online, in terms of UK related.
I don't feel there's that much information when it comes to UK Black Lives Matter. I think there is a lot more information around US Black Lives Matter, the movement, but when it comes to what measurable results they want, like what we can see, what can we actually do to be like, yeah, we've achieved this. There's not that much. Obviously now, in the last, 4 or 5 weeks, a lot has happened, and I think it's amazing. And I think those are the types of things that we should be pushing forward, like that conversation of this is what has been achieved through the protests, and not just like we want social justice, because what does that look like?
And even just, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I'm just looking at it now. One of the websites of blackmatteruk.com, it just says the Black Lives Matter movement organisation, and this website was set up in July 2016 following the racist killing of Alton Sterling, and Yeah, our group was founded from an open meeting at Dalston Moss, attended by more than 200 people. We don't claim to speak for anyone but ourselves, concerned activists fighting for justice and fighting for racial and social justice in the UK. It's not clear compared to the US one, where like both of them are not clear, but you know what I mean? Like they actually set what their intentions are.
But then that's the thing, even the US one that you described, that they said that they believed in non-violent civil protest, was it? Or civil disobedience? Was that it?
Yeah, because even watching a TED talk that Cami shared with me, they just said our intention from the beginning was to connect Black people from all over the world who have a shared desire for justice to act together in their communities. The impetus for that commitment was and still is the rampant and deliberate violence inflicted on us by the state. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents and children are comfortable. We foster a queer affirming network. When we gather, we do so with the intention of freeing others from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, or rather the belief that all in the world are heterosexual unless she, he, or they disclose otherwise. Obviously, setting that out is different here in the UK, so it's like, how would you measure that here? That makes sense? Or different countries?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, and not so much with that last quote you just read up before, the three Black women that you said founded the American Black Lives Matter, them saying that kind of the precedent was for example, non-violent civil disobedience. So it would seem that is kind of at the crux of the origin of Black Lives Matter in America, at least. But then a lot of people nowadays that still consider themselves to be at the heart of Black Lives Matter would condone, for example, rioting and stuff, and that both of them can be seen under kind of Black Lives Matter. So I'm a bit confused as to kind of the constraints and the exact kind of goals and exact rules of the movement in some ways. But
can I also say as well, I found it quite strange how the quote that you just read out went from mentioning social justice to the LGBT agenda. And I feel like that is kind of not discoloring, but it kind of diffuses the focus of the intention of the whole movement, because they are both oppressed groups in their own rights. And I think to merge them together, I think it does dilute the message to an extent. And I think it creates a divide in the sense that I'm going to say, as a Black person, I know that in the Black community, there's a lot of stigma around LGBT. And so I feel like automatically that creates an internal divide. And then what that manifests is an external divide in the way that everyone else in the world receives that. And so that's why you see that there's some people who are pro-LGBT and anti in the same way that they are pro-peace and anti-peace, in the sense of, they're willing to go out and riot. And I feel like the way that if there was kind of sincere and kind of strategized intention behind it, they would make sure that they keep the umbrella and the focus being the social justice of oppression against white supremacists, so acknowledging all the other oppressions that fall under that. So like, for example, when we look at Iraq and we look at Yemen, those things do not exclude the same oppressive hand that creates the need for Black Lives Matter movement. Does that make sense? And so I think if we focus on what the cause is supposed to be, everything else should fall into context.
I think it's very interesting what you're saying. And so the question kind of goes to, is this more of a question of race then, or something else, like a class problem? I don't know, because we have like this we say white privilege, right? And not every white person is going to experience white privilege. Obviously, like, they might experience more or less. There's like a spectrum to it, right? But it's curious. It's a curious thing to look at from the perspective of someone who's like, I'm not white, but I'm not exactly like dark either. Like, I'm quite pretty on the lighter spectrum, right? And I wouldn't say I've experienced white privilege, but I do recognize that, for example, I might not feel that much prejudice against me. Like, I personally haven't. So it's not something that I can resonate with in the same way that, say, some Black people experience, right? And I question, like you said, if the conversation has gone from, there's this upper hand that certain white people have, especially the upper class man, that you can definitely see here in the UK and definitely in the US. But then is that like a separate conversation, or does it all kind of come under one?
I think it all comes under one, because like the issue is, I don't think it's really like individual like prejudices or like individual privileges. It's just like the way that everybody's talking now, it's to abolish the whole system, like the whole capitalist system, because that's what allows, like the same way that race is like a constituent of like of capitalism, is the same reason that, I don't know, LGBT people are like discriminated against. Like the whole thing is like to get rid of the whole system. It's not really to do with making it.
If I may, how are you defining the system? What do you mean specifically when you refer to a system?
The capitalist labor production system, like the whole sort of. It's not really about getting more opportunities for underprivileged people, or like for example, using the example of like Obama, for example, using the example of like his presidency, that clearly didn't do much to change anything, because Black Lives Matter started under him, and that's because it doesn't really matter about how many opportunities you give to say Black people. It's about making it so that a capitalist framework is no longer the framework from which we live, because regardless of how many Black millionaires or billionaires or whatever you have, if we still live under a capitalist framework, there's always going to be an underclass who needs to be subjugated for like people to still be rich, if that makes sense. And that's why it needs to be like intersectional rebellion of sorts. Like it has to be like Black people, gay people, women, like whoever, like to just get rid of that framework.
So are you anti-capitalism, or? Yeah,
because it's like you can't. There's no good capitalism, because it's like capitalism's like born from like race. Like if you think about slavery, for example. That's like so obviously there was like slavery before the transatlantic slave trade, but like if you think about the growth of like globalization and like global trade and global capitalism, it starts from race-based slavery. Like it starts from the African people being transported to America, and sort of like global sort of trading starts from that. So from there is no other way, or like there is no like good capitalism, because it's all like born out of racism, basically.
I was going to add that's like 100% right. Capitalism and slavery kind of go hand in hand, because that's what created the boom. Like, for example, the Industrial Revolution, it wasn't actually because we had, a few extra machines. It was actually from the investment that had been put into slavery and cotton fields, and kind of these sweatshop kind of slave type environments that bred capitalism. And so capitalism is a system that requires someone to be below someone else in order for there to be a profit kind of gaining system. And I want to harken back to Zach saying how we have to get rid of the whole thing. We have to literally just scrap the whole thing, because it's like saying, say what's going on in Yemen now, and someone comes out of Yemen and they end up doing well in the West. That doesn't mean that there's no longer a problem in Yemen, because people are able to come here and do well. So in the same way, we can't say that, examples of Black excellence where people have gone through pure, hardship and still excel means that there's no racism, or that, the system is a system in which Black people can still propel. Because we know that in history that Black people have been used as tokens in order to meet this diversity quota, which is another thing that I have an issue with. And so I think, kind of starting from scratch will allow us to take away from the things that capitalism is rooted in.
So if I may, what's your alternative? When you say start from scratch, what do you think would be the better approach?
An example is socialism, but I know it gets a lot of kind of like flack for not working. But I've also read a lot of, people like, is it Connor West, who speaks about, stuff like socialism being possible if done in the right way and with the right intentions. You can't do you can't do socialism with the capitalism mentality, and I think that's what happens.
Right, but what you just said about socialism being possible if done properly, I would say the same thing about capitalism. I agree. Hear me out. I agree that capitalism is flawed. I agree that it is a system that it does encourage at least people's greedy instincts to come out, and it does allow for things. And say what you will about it may have been born out of slavery, which I don't know enough about history to say that isn't the case. But I suspect that it's not just specifically born out of purely slavery. I suspect there's more to it than that, but I don't really know enough about history to say that. But the point is that just because it was born in some kind of immoral territory doesn't necessarily mean that we can't adapt it and we can't change it to be more fair. So equality of opportunity, I think, is something that we could definitely get to as a society, and not equality of outcome, because I think that is completely not right to kind of force an end outcome as you want it. But I think equality of opportunity is something that has been getting better progressively over the past century, and it's something that can continue to get much better. And I'm not saying there's not an issue. Obviously, there is still a big issue in that a lot of people with power are very greedy, and they do take steps to maintain them being powerful and subjugating people who don't have as much opportunity. But I think with movement and discussion, I think it is possible to adapt, to make something better. There's no need to completely start afresh, because then you lose a lot of the good things that have come out of capitalism. And say what you will, but there are a lot of good things about capitalism. One of them is the idea of a meritocracy, and the idea that one is free to climb through social mobility. And you might say that's not as available to certain people of color, but we could get to a point where your outcome in life is dependent on how hard you work or where you apply yourself. We could get to that point for everyone, whereas something like socialism or even communism, it feels very kind of enforced, and it feels like a kind of really artificial manipulation of variables that in my opinion takes away people's real freedom. But
I disagree with like the meritocracy thing 100% in the UK in particular, because like the UK is basically a feudal system. Like there is no like you can't win regardless of what you do. Like the UK is just it's like a huge class thing. Like there will never ever there can't even be a meritocracy when like there's a whole like a whole family who are just like born into privilege. Like as soon as you have a monarchy, like a hereditary monarchy, you can't have a fair society. So the UK is
you say that, but I know tons of people, white and black, that were born into low class families, working class families, that through education and the right mindset have gone on to do really well and get great jobs.
I'm not saying that. Yeah, I agree.
It's not that uncommon either.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's uncommon either. We all went to university also. That's like a form of social mobility. But even that is like a sort of white supremacist framework, because it presupposes the idea that all you need is hard work. I'm not saying that you're like a white supremacist. Like I'm just like as an example, like because it's not just because of hard work or like a good attitude that gets anyone anywhere. Like that's just
I agree. It's not just that. I agree. I agree there's a huge amount of wealth inequality, and I agree that there's a huge difference between those who are born into lucky families that happen to have a lot of money and those that are born into poverty. I agree there's a huge disparity there that needs to be addressed. I'm absolutely on board there, but I don't think it's unsolvable. I don't think it's so unsolvable that we completely start afresh with a whole new system, is what I'm saying, basically.
In regards to where you studied, as well as what I look like being used as a measurement stick, my kind of intellectual capacity. And I think all those things stack against on top of each other to create the things that we're trying to kind of dismantle right now. And I think that's what Zach is trying to hearken to.
Yeah, I do hear that. And when you say that there may be these prejudices and whether it's kind of a case of outright explicit racism or if it's more kind of implicit bias, I'm not saying that doesn't exist. It seems perfectly plausible that is at least happening to some extent. My worry is that some people are instinctually seeing it as being completely rampant, whereas I don't think it's happening as often as some people maybe assume. And my point is, if you are assuming, for example, that, I mean, I'm a bit more familiar with like some of the research in America, but for example, the fact that in America, a lot of black people won't get into as high-end positions, there is a jump of an assumption that you have to make to say that the pure reason for that is prejudice and racism. There may be other factors that aren't talked about as much. And I can see why it might be tempting to suspect that it's purely down to prejudice. But I think that is a bit of an assumption that we shouldn't necessarily be making too quickly. But although I agree there's some of that, I agree there's some prejudice for sure.
Sorry to hog the spotlight, but I wanted to quickly jump back to that and say that I forgot. I think Tim Wise is his name, and he's a gentleman in America who uses his kind of position to go out and talk against racism. And I think what he says is what I'm about to say to you, and that's that your ability to say what you just said right now is in itself white privilege, because you are able to live your life without your skin color being, the first thing that has to be in consideration when you're going with stuff like job roles and stuff. But us as black people, it's a common reality. And so it's easier for you to not see it as a commonality because A, it's not within your lived experience, and B, I don't assume people within your immediate circle, i.e., your close family, and then maybe some of your friends are, do experience it either. And so I think there's a limit to which you can understand it simply because you haven't lived it. I, as a person who was born in Burundi, have been in a civil outbreak, like a civil war. So when I come here and say we spoke about civil war and stuff happening in Yemen, I have a completely different perspective to what someone that was born here and hasn't seen war would have. And I think there's an appreciation that we have to have for each other when we are discussing these things and the limits to our understanding.
Of course, yeah. No, I absolutely respect that, and I do understand that I won't understand this issue from a personal standpoint, nowhere near as well as you or any other person of color. I think that there is a danger with assuming prejudice or intent without hard proof. Like, for example, if you go to a job interview, you said something along the lines of you're seeing your race as like the predominant kind of factor, or how was it that you phrased it exactly?
Sorry? Oh, kind of prime consideration, yeah. Right,
yeah, the prime. So say you go to a job and you feel like the prime consideration is your skin color. If I may, like, what evidence or what proof do you have that is how the person trying to employ you is seeing it as well?
Sure, no worries. For me, I'm speaking especially in my kind of lived experience, which is trying to get into law. So, when I've gone into interviews, law internships, and all these sort of things, the first thing is the fact that you are most likely the one or the second black person in that atmosphere. And so it's kind of an outnumbering situation. And second, I want to say it's the same way, for example, feminism. I think the ladies in the chat right now, they understand feminism and the experience of a woman in this world and in Western society in a way that I can never understand, even when I see it with my own eyes, for example, when we see overt racism. But there's a underlying like lived experience that I can't fully comprehend, and the only way that I can fully understand it, which is why you point out what you pointed out, is if I say, okay, what are the numbers? And then you see that there is, pay gaps between genders in workplaces and stuff like that. And I think numbers is what allows us to see, the fact that there's disproportion there means there's some disproportion elsewhere, because there should be representation in when I go to job offers or when I watch TV and stuff like that.
Yeah, so, I'm glad you say that. I'm glad you point to the numbers, because again, this kind of harkens back to my point about assumptions that even with the gender pay gap, for example, there is a disproportionate data there. Absolutely, it's clear. But the reason as to why that disproportion is there isn't really understood. And people assume that because on average women are paid less, the answer must be sexism. And all I'm saying is it may be partly sexism, but there may also be other factors at play. So I worry that sexism, racism, all of it together, it does exist in some extent, absolutely. But I worry that some people are kind of saying that it exists, it completely explains things, when I think that maybe it only partly explains things. It's just my point. But I sympathize with what you say about kind of being the only black person going for a role, and I understand that obviously can be a bit disheartening and whatnot. But yeah,
I totally get hear you on that. It's like whether we want to admit it or not admit it, like color is the first thing you see, and purely based on the fact that even in my community, in Latin community, racism is so embedded even in our language that like we have even sayings like good hair, bad hair, and it's purely based on skin color and physical traits. So even things like, you know, people saying like I don't see color can be problematic, and so it goes back to like, I get what you're saying. When you go into an interview, you kind of have it at the forefront that the color of your skin can be the first thing that someone kind of thinks about, because it's obvious. It's like what you see, right?
Again, I think it's risky to start seeing everything through the prism, because then if you get to the point where you kind of, everything you see about the world, you're seeing it through the prism of I'm a black man and everyone sees me in every capacity as black or Asian or whatever, it can be tempting to then develop this worldview that then you might have a bit of a confirmational bias, and everything that you see you might interpret as racism. For example, walking down the street, someone might give you a funny look and you might immediately jump to the conclusion they've given me a funny look because I'm black. It might just be that you're wearing a weird shirt, or that, I don't know, that you look like someone they know. Like, there's a lot of explanation for things, and I worry that seeing things too much through the prism of race might encourage certain jumping to conclusions like that. But I agree, there's an appropriate limit to see things as race. But
can I quickly say, I'm really glad that you touched on psychology and kind of like, you know, confirmation bias and stuff, because I want to kind of like just create a context for everyone to use when we're talking about everything we're talking about now. And that's that you have to remember that at some point in history, i.e. the 1600s, the British Empire decided that they're going to create a status quo, and the status quo was going to be white. And God became white with blonde hair and blue eyes, so was Jesus. So was everything about goodness, so was everything about purity, so was everything to do with our people's cultures and idea of marriage and love. It was walked behind the idea of whiteness and having a white dress. Even when it comes to the afterlife and death, it's about seeing white light and stuff like that. And these things might seem kind of unimportant, but these were strategically and purposefully used in order to create a stereotype that allowed for white supremacy when it was completely overt. So we can sit here and talk about it being underlying and when you go to work, but you have to understand that we live in a system that was created on a structure that's meant to support the idea that white is right and anything brown or discolored is bad, is evil. Racist view that's kind of propagated within the home. So it will come from stuff like the TV and the media, like the fact that every time you see Africa, people are dying and starving, and it's like, yeah, that is what's happening. But if you're going to show it, tell us why it's happening. And then it's going to go back to the British Empire, isn't it? And stuff like that. And so when people are showing stuff, you know, specific views of black people, and then they propagate specific views within the household, that's what creates that racist individual. And so what Black Lives Matter is trying to fight is the powers that be should be put in kind of using their powers to prevent certain portrayal of black people in the media, because that's what kind of educates the culture of the society that we live in.
yeah, so I think that definitely should be done, but at the same time, it doesn't need to be one or the other. I think at the same time that should be done, also there should be emphasis on personal responsibility. And even though you may have learned things from the past in a way that you weren't in control over, you are in control of keeping those lessons embodied in your behavior. So I think there should also be emphasis on people understanding themselves well enough to call out their own conditioning, whatever.
Definitely. Yeah. I agree.
I think all types of like representation and trying to get like more black people into like to do certain things is regressive. Like it doesn't help. Like we need to like drop all of like, let's get more black people into Oxbridge and shit. Like it doesn't, like it's antithetical to like the goals, because you go into the like, even if like for example, I have at uni, I had a lot of friends who went to Brampton Manor, and they used to say like, yeah, like they used to want us to go to Oxbridge or whatever. And the issue is, it's like not having black students who are smart enough to go to Oxbridge. It's like when they get there, they're like, a lot of them really struggle, because it's not really just an education thing, it's a culture thing also. So you'll go there and like not really know how to like move around the certain like groups or whatever, and then you don't know how to deal with the racism and stuff. So like we're sending our kids into like these really hostile environments, and it's like the same. It's like we don't really want to be employed by. We don't really want more black people on like the BBC or whatever. Like that's not really a goal. That's just like a symbolic thing. Like there needs to be like substantial change in this.
Do you think part of that Oxford example? Do you think part of that could be due to class? Because, for example,
it's a huge thing. Like it's not really. Yeah, well, go on. Sorry,
yeah, because I don't know if that's what you were implying, but kind of I also would feel like a bit of a fish out of water in somewhere like Oxbridge, and I wouldn't really feel as naturally kind of in those circles and have been able to kind of move around those circles. I also would feel a bit out of place. So I wonder if it's maybe partly race, but also largely about class as well.
And the class system like goes back to like the not to keep on hogging on like Marx or something, but like it goes back to the capitalist structure of and one of the worst things about this like sort of like representation thing is like it's like Oxford will usually like flaunt their black students out or Asian students out or whatever as like a sort of diversity thing. Like when you actually go there, it's like hugely hostile. Like it's not a welcoming environment. It's like we need to like stop this sort of. We just need to have more representation, or be black excellence. Like the black excellence thing is like the worst thing in the world to me. Like I hate it. Like it's so dumb to me. I don't understand why. Like just let people be. Like we're not really, and that's just really just the white supremacist like framework. Also, it's like what is black excellence is like having a certain job or like talking a certain way or like going to certain things, and most of the time those things are like Eurocentric anyways, because you like internalized all of the stuff that you've learned. But also you're a psychologist, right? So I think if we talking like the psychology of race or whatever, or like the construction of race, if we just think about what like black and white, it really doesn't matter about like individual like trying to change the way you think, because if we think about like the construction of what black means, like there's a lot of work being done about this right now. Just one guy has a phrase like Africans went onto the slave ships and became black, so like the slave relation is like always going to be related to black, because that's like how the creation of like the race of black and white was. So that it's like regardless of like what anybody tries to do to like change the way they think, in the framework of which we live, which is built on the 400 or whatever years of the transatlantic slave trade, black is always going to be associated with subjugation. Like that is just how like the formation of race is. It's like regardless of what we do, unless we change how we live, that's always what it will be.
Yeah, I see your point, and to be fair, I think we agree about a lot of things. I think we're just kind of coming at it almost from two like philosophical viewpoints, in that we both agree that change kind of needs to happen, and I personally think that the way to change is for all the individuals to change and then come up and change things from the top after that. Whereas you maybe seem to be implying more that change should happen from a top-down kind of way.
Oh no! I agree with you. Like it has to start with like the people, but I don't think the goal needs to be like to make us all like equally wealthy in like the same way that we live now. I think that we just have to like change.
I agree, and like what you said about kind of just like quotas and getting black people in as tokens. I agree that that's completely wrong, and that shouldn't happen. That seems very shallow, and it seems like people just trying to kind of seem like they're doing the right thing without actually doing it. And I would say the ideal thing would be if everyone had equal opportunity and then could just do whatever the hell they want, and you don't kind of measure like, right, we need this number of people doing that, and you just kind of be free. And obviously there's not equal opportunity now, so that is something to strive towards. But yeah, I agree with you.
Do you wanna add something? Because I know you've been.
I've really just been listening. Everyone has really like great ideas and ideologies about the different kind of ways that Black Lives Matter has kind of come about and how we're living in society right now. I understand what Zach, what you were just saying about black excellency can sometimes be annoying, because it's like other races don't have that kind of thing where something great happens to somebody, like, for example, I don't know, getting a first at university or getting this great job or becoming something, and then they're like, oh, I don't know, Asian excellency, white excellency, or all these kind of stuff. It's just because of that individual that they're looked at and they're like, okay, this person did a great thing. And it kind of brings back the fact that normal Black people can't just be normal. You have to be excellent, or you have to be great to be seen in society as somebody that is someone who is worthy or worth it. So in those kind of terms, those things do need to be scrapped. But again, yes, it does have a lot to do with I think it has a lot to do with classism as well, because coming back to that kind of Oxford thing, and when people are looked at differently when they're taken into those kind of universities and things like that, I don't know how the system will change. So that's another kind of topic to bring into. I don't know if, not to say if things will get better as a whole, but it will just take a lot of time, and it's a lot of reasoning, like how will it happen? Because it's easy to say, we can all see the problems that are there, but they've been the problems that have been continuing for so many years. What is going to be done to change that? And even we can see in our like government and things like that now, where some people have the idea that if you bring people of color into the higher societies and government and politics and all that kind of thing, they will bring their own ideologies and their ways of power to change how the system is put together. But it doesn't always work like that. We can see that now. There are quite a few, definitely it's not as much as the white people in government and in politics, but there are quite a few people of color that are there right now. And there hasn't been much change. Even with people like Diane Abbott, it's more so just been a lot of backlash towards her. Then there's other people where there's like Priti Patel, where people will argue that she's not really fighting for people of color at all. But then it's also down to the individual. Not everybody wants to fight for their race. Some people just want to be forward for themselves. They don't always want to be carrying the whole thing of, yes, just because I am a person of color, or just because I am Black doesn't mean that I have to fight for my whole race. I just want to be me. Which again comes back to that Black excellency. Like, sometimes you just want to be yourself and excel. You don't want to have to carry all the kind of stigmas around you. So,
can I ask you, like following from that, have you ever had do you feel like you've ever had people shocked about something about you, or about your kind of performance, or, you know, that's impressive, that they could have been shocked because of your race? Or do you feel like you haven't had that before?
I feel like I've definitely had that before. People would not see it as racism themselves when they come across and say those kind of stuff to you, like those off-word kind of comments where it's
they think it's a compliment.
Yeah, they make it look as though it's a compliment, but it's definitely to do with race. And you know it, they know it, but they wouldn't definitely say that that's the kind of thing it is. I've had those kind of things, definitely. Again, it just comes back to, I don't know who was saying it before, but it all comes back to like home. These things, how will they change? We can sit here and like talk about it and discuss it and think of how they were constructed and all those kind of stuff. But I personally think that everything comes down to how we live as communities and societies in our homes, and how we discuss these things from when people are young. Like people can, at this age and at older age and everything like that, like Lucas, you were saying before, that people need to know themselves, and it's not just about like systematic racism, it's about the individual. That is very true. It's about how the individual wants to come across and how the individual thinks about race. But at the end of the day, it's going to be hard for an individual who is racist or who does have racial prejudices or ideologies to change if they have lived their whole life as that kind of person. It starts from home, which is why the younger generation, or the generation that we're bringing up right now, we need to start instilling that kind of stuff in them, so then we don't have the same problems in the next continuous amount of years, because I think that's the only way that change can come about. It's like, how are we going to do that? How do you make sure everyone is, every home is bringing up children that don't have that kind of ideology? I don't know. I saw a quote that once actually said, I think a Black woman posted it on Twitter, and she was like, what are you going to do? Like, what are you as a white person going to do to make sure that your child doesn't end up killing my child, which is their kind of reality in America right now. And that's not just with the deaths and stuff. That's just, I think everybody needs to have those conversations. It's just not just a white and black conversation. Camilla, you were saying that you have that kind of racial prejudices as well in the Latin community too. So it's not just a white and black issue. This is something now that everybody needs to be talking about, which is why it's important. But how are we going to come about with change?
Yeah. Just so go ahead, Alfani.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was gonna kind of like round out to why I kind of asked you that question of if you've had that situation, and that's because I think that's why, as a black person, it ends up being either obligation or duty, however you want to see it, for you to represent your race. Like, I feel like I don't have a choice anymore. Like, when it comes to it, like if I walk into a law firm, I think everyone else realizes it more than I do. So me choosing to ignore it won't change the fact that I might be treated differently or seen differently or, approached differently because of it. So yeah, so I feel like I kind of get the benefit of the black excellency thing, but I feel like majority of it is detrimental to, like, on an individual scale. But yeah, go on, Lucas. Sorry.
Yeah, no, just touching on what Natalie was saying about kind of what is the best way to change. I think that's such an important question, and it's so important we do think about that, because whether you think that we're all going to disagree about how much change should happen, for example, whether you think that the problem is capitalism and there should be a new system in place, whether you think that the system can work but just certain changes in whatever area, whatever happens, like, I think that conversation is just so utterly important. And for example, with race, right, let's say that I have I say some things, or I believe some things which many people see to be ignorant. For example, the way to change my mind in that situation, I'm not saying anyone here's done that, but on social media, I'm seeing a lot of it. The way to change my mind if I'm ignorant is not to kind of call me a racist or tell me I'm ignorant and go get educated in like a condescending way. The way is to kind of sit down and have a conversation with me and explain to me why what I'm saying is ignorant and convince me, stuff like that. So I worry that I worry that some people are trying to create change by just kind of making very kind of blunt orders and demands and accusations without sitting down and actually working in almost like a cooperative fashion. And I'm not saying kind of sit and hold hands with people that are being super racist to you, but like it does take a certain level of actually trying to convince someone and change someone's mind through understanding, as opposed to kind of just telling them you're ignorant, do this, do that. And again, no one's doing that here, but on social media, I'm seeing a lot of that kind of, if you think this, don't even talk to me. If you think that, and it's just like, you're not going to change anyone's mind like that. You're not going to get through to anyone by being condescending or patronizing or even aggressive. And I worry that across the board, and it's both people and far right people speak the exact same way to far left people. And in the case of feminism and trans rights and everything, I feel like social media is such a big part of this. It's very kind of us versus them, and I believe this and you believe that, and I'm right, you're wrong, as opposed to coming at it from different angles. There might be some common truth. Let's work together to try and figure out what the hell's going on. So I think that understanding is what needs to be present in how we go about the change that we all recognize needs to happen to some degree. But
can I ask, based on your previous statement about accountability and individual responsibility, do you feel like the way that it applies to black people getting roles and stuff like that, would it not apply similarly to people educating themselves about racism and about the discrimination, so that when they are seeing this post, they don't automatically respond negatively to it? Because for me, if I did see those posts, and some of them are really dumb, but I saw one that said something to do with if you don't think that X, Y, Z is racist, then I don't even want to have the discussion with you. Then I feel like an extent of that is for people to educate themselves, because I can't be angry about you not telling me something that you don't like when I don't know anything about it, because I have to understand my view of it and come to you at it with a context of my own. Do you see what I'm saying? I think there's a lot of social responsibility on white people as well to kind of educate themselves, or even black people that are ignorant to racism and discrimination, to educate themselves about it, because there's also internalized hate.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it should be everyone's, regardless of whatever social issue you're talking about, it should always be everyone's duty to educate themselves on important things. And I agree that obviously, yeah, because the schools seem to have failed in educating people about this well enough. I agree that's something that each of us, white or any other race, should make an effort to learn about it more. I agree that the issue I'm was more kind of pointing to was the tone that a lot of people I'm seeing are saying that in. Obviously, you've said it in a very reasonable way, so I would hear that and I wouldn't get kind of triggered. I wouldn't get into kind of like defense mode. Whereas a lot of people, the way they say it, and sometimes it's very subtle, it's very small little kind of like backhanded things. It's done in a way that even just from a psychological perspective, I could see why a lot of people would read that and the blood would start to boil and they'd be like, who the fuck are you to tell me that? Kind of, it creates a bit of like a kind of like a hostility to it. So I think you need to be really careful about how things are said, basically.
Definitely.
I just want to move swiftly back to movement itself, because I'm just watching the time. I just want to bring this question to you guys. Do you feel this movement is only for Black people?
Although we might disagree about how exactly it should be solved, I agree initially that definitely involves everyone and will benefit or be a detriment to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely not just for Black people. And like Angela Davis was on like something the other day talking about this, like how she had to battle with this in like the 1970s about like the sort of like Black nationalist shit, which is like super reductive. It's like, it has to be like an intersectional internationalist movement, because when you start talking about like this is a Black thing, or this is like a Palestine thing or whatever, like that's just the same as like the anti-Black racism that you're trying to fight, basically. So like it has to be like a intersectional thing.
I've noticed on like socials again with like memes and people's stories where they said like, oh, you know, there's certain people who have not spoken about this, and I think they automatically think, oh, because they haven't spoken, it's not like they don't feel like this, you know, the Black Power movement is not important. Some people, you know, they have this kind of saying like it's supposed to make you uncomfortable, which is very true. It's not supposed to make you feel like, you know, you're supposed to feel that kind of tension, that kind of uncomfortability. But I feel like at times, you know, when someone's not speaking, or you haven't seen like, you know, like I say, a good friend of yours who's not Black and hasn't spoken about it, or come to you, like I've had discussions with my white friends and they've come forward and just like said, oh, like firstly, are you okay? And I said, yeah. And then just like, oh, like this is how I feel, like I'm totally with you, I support this movement, I've donated, I've done this. And it's just like the conversation. But at the same time, there's some others who I guess they see their friends who haven't spoken about it and then just like, oh, okay, I'm not going to talk to you, but we're not friends anymore because, you know, you might be secretly racist, you know, all of that stuff.
I can't speak for anybody else, but like I know that I wouldn't have, like if it took like this to happen for me to find out that you were racist, I'd like take a look at myself maybe, because like I don't think I'd ever like have a friend who was like, or who I don't think I have any friends who I've like not spoken about this stuff like this with outside of this context. If you do, then I think that's a you issue, probably not you, like the said person.
Can I don't know what your plan is for the conversation, so feel free to override it. But could we, if possible, go on to the actual kind of issue of police killings in America and look at some of the research with that, because there's some stuff that I'd like to talk about, which is probably quite contentious, and is something that I could see the impulse to maybe see that me even saying this is kind of white supremacist style rhetoric and stuff. But I feel like, and again, if I'm being very ignorant in saying these things, like I urge you to convince me that I am and why I am. But there are some things there that I feel aren't as much a part of the Black Lives Matter narrative as they should be. But if there's something else you want to talk about first, go for that.
Like just say like what is it?
Yeah, so just kind of issues in, so for example, with the data, like, so in America, I don't know so much about UK, but in America, so it's what, 13% of the population are Black, and they're being killed roughly kind of 25% of the police killings. Would you say that disparity, that jump from 13 to 25, would you say that it's clear that is completely due to racism? Or is it possible that there are certain issues, kind of even culturally, such as the prevalence of fatherless homes in Black communities, that contribute to crime, and therefore, and I see the smile, so I know that it's triggering to say that, and I know that the impulse must be to kind of see me as some outrageous.
No. You're making great. Like this is it's great that you say this, but I think if we keep going back, like if we work through the steps of why certain things could have happened, we're going to get back to the same. Like there is no like left route out of this. It's a direct line, really. It's like, so if why are there fatherless homes, supposedly fatherless homes, in predominantly black areas? Like why are there?
I suspect it's a combination of reasons. I suspect it is in part previous decades of racist policy and stuff like that, but I also suspect it is in part an individual problem that of family structure breaking down. So
No,
I agree.
That's like a huge. That's almost like eugenicist type of like discussion. Not that you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying that you're a racist, but like that is like, this is where like it becomes funny, because I'll just use like broad terms. The power structure will like do to sort of like negate or like make clear racism seem dubious, or make you check or make you like think again about like why things are bad, is like try and give you these logical discussion points about like black on black crime, and like Akala's just like give it like spoken about this and like why that's like a ridiculous thing to say, because like if black people are only living amongst black people, obviously you will have black crime. It's not like,
but to the extent that it is happening, to the extent that, and if I may, blacks in America are 6 times more likely to get murdered than whites, and 95% of those murders are by other African Americans, and I know what you're saying, but like it's very disproportionate, and it's to the point where
but it's disproportionate, because if you think about the racist policies which have made ghettos, for lack of a better word, and the lack of resources so if all black people are living in a small area together, obviously they're going to have crime, because there's crime everywhere. But why is there so much crime in these areas? Because of the racist policies, which has made people desperate and had to do certain things.
Yeah, sure. And obviously, for the record, I'm absolutely not implying that black people are inherently more likely to commit crime or anything. Obviously, that would be completely absurd and completely racist. But I'm saying there are reasons for it, sure, and a lot of them may be due to previous racist policy and the fact that...
It's not even previous racist policy, it's like current.
Could I ask Lucas to read out his statistic again, please?
So blacks are 6 times more likely to get murdered in the US than whites, and 95% of these murders are committed by other blacks in America.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of like basically see what Zach's saying, and that's the sense that I feel like a lot of the times these statistics don't account for things like demographic, like Akala said. They don't account for even stuff like psychology, which we've like brought up even in this discussion. And I think a lot of the time, black on black crime is more or less just a rhetoric. Because even when you say it, you can hear it's got a better ring to it than white on white crime. And if you ask yourself why, then you kind of look back into the journalistic kind of narrative of it, and you see how it's been propagated to create this notion of a black thug. So I think even, for example, another statistic that I was shown, that it's American statistic, that, what was it? Black people don't make up a huge percentage of the population in America, so how can they be, most of the, like, how are they not most of the killing or something like that? So essentially saying, because there's not that many of them, that's why the deaths look like a lot of deaths, or something like that. And I feel like those kind of things disconsider the fact that a lot of the times, there will be confrontations with police, and it might not completely end up in a death, but it might end up in an arrest. And even that arrest is unjust and is in itself a product of kind of that racism. But yeah.
Sure. And yeah, again, I hear your point that those statistics, or if there are disproportionate killings in the black community, that may be the result of racist policy. But I worry that completely attributing it to that is a problem and takes away individual agency. And when you create this narrative that all of the bad things happening in the black community are because of oppression, it does take away a lot of responsibility in the black community, and it makes people feel like they're kind of just complete victims in society, and people are responsible. If you go out and you kill someone in a gang shooting, sure, there may be factors that out of your control that contributed to you being there, but the ultimate responsibility is in your hands. And if you go and don't stick with your family and your children, and then you're not present for your family, sure, there may be reasons leading to that, but it is your responsibility. And I feel like putting complete onus on the system, I feel like it's damaging. It may be partly there.
I don't think anybody is putting all the onus. Like, I think that's an academic tendency. Like, if like, I'm talking like in this way because we're having like a theoretical discussion, but no one like on the ground is saying I'm in a gang because the government hates me. Like, no one is saying that. Like, this is like, that's only an academic discussion of like, we're trying to get to the root cause. Like, if you like speak to people in like the real world, they will like, that's how like the whole like black excellent narrative starts. It's because like if we're talking like in communities, like it's all like everybody holds everybody personally accountable to like make themselves better. No one is like, you won't need a person. You really won't need
I'm not holding them completely personally accountable. I'm just saying at least to some degree.
What I'm saying is like no one is saying that it's like a government or like a society. That's just like a talking point that I don't know. I don't even really know where that talking point comes from, because no one, like, you never ever meet anybody in a gang saying I'm in a gang because like, no, they're saying like I would want to make money because this is the way that I want to make. Like, they're not even thinking that broadly. You know, this is just a stereotype of what I'm saying. But yeah, I disagree with that. That's not how this ever works.
No, I think to what Zach's saying is that when you are talking about individual accountability, that is right. But like you said before, we should use numbers to gain perspective. So the numbers that you read out gave us perspective that there is some kind of disproportionality. And then when we look into the reasons why there is that disproportionality, etc., and you unravel something like black on black crime and, you know, why people do those things, like he said, it's usually, you know, they want to make money in a way that's quicker. And usually that's only because they see that as a faster investment than maybe going through the system. And then that is also an accumulation of the fact that they might be living in a society where they don't have a lot of kind of opportunities in their vicinity that would allow them to be able to legitimately do something. So like someone like me, from North London, Edmonton, right? I know a lot of people that are my age, and they took the route of the illegitimate route, if I could say. And so I know there are also a lot of other people who went to university like me and, you know, sought routes. And a lot of us who did the legitimate route had to go outside of the community to get those opportunities. Like, there weren't, you know, law firms coming to my area and my school. But when I went to actual law firms and met people from different areas, they've gone to schools, you know, where law firms go to them and they try to get pupils to go to their firms and stuff like that. And that's happened now in a way that is systematic, because, for example, if you look at postcodes come with a currency, right? You know, a house is going to cost more depending on where it is. And so in itself, that creates a system whereby, because of capitalism, everyone wants the best quality of everything. So the best students are going to be in the best schools, and the best schools aren't going to be in the poorest areas. Do you see what I'm saying, and on how that becomes systematic?
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I would say that that's more about class than race.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're like, it is like, when I speak about all of these things, I'm like, my goal is like to make all of our lives better. It's like not like a black and white issue. I really don't even really care about like individual prejudices. Like, it is like getting rid of like a whole. When I say the capitalist power structure, I'm also talking about classism, because like that is just how it's stratified. Like, all of like the things I'm saying is like to make everybody's lives better, not just like to make racism better, you know.
Yeah.
And I quickly add one more thing, like, just to kind of as context. I think I don't like how we forget about intersectionality. Like, all these things, it's like, yeah, like you're saying, Lucas, they are kind of propagated by other things, but that's because in society things are layered. Nothing is individual. It only seems individual because we need to contextualize things so that we can have talking points. But when you look at everything is intersectional. like when racism was implemented, it wasn't just in schools and they separated schools and segregated schools, but it was churches, it was restaurants, it was everything about society. And so I think, yeah, that's what I wanted to add for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. I just want to touch on obviously since here in the UK, how we've had many demonstrations across the UK. What's your thoughts towards when you hear this kind of phrase, the UK is not a racist country? Because to me, I'm just when I hear that, I'm just I'm sorry, what? There's loads of examples, police brutality here, Black people being killed. I don't understand how someone can have that saying of the UK is not racist. I don't know if you feel that type of way.
I feel like that's largely a kind of a linguistic kind of distinction, in that it's almost like, to take the example of kind of lying, but there's a difference between saying you lie quite a bit and saying you are a liar. And similarly, there's a difference between saying, I would agree that there is still a lot of racism in the UK, but I wouldn't say the UK is racist, in the sense that there's so much of it that it can be seen to completely characterize it, basically. So I agree there is racism in the UK, but I wouldn't go as far as defining the UK by its racism. But that's just the way I look at it.
Yeah, Lucas is right. There is definitely a linguistic thing also, but the UK is 100% racist. As Stormzy was misquoted, but in fact it was actually correct. Diana Abbott said one time, the UK created racism, which they did. It's the UK is.
Would you sorry, finish your point, but I want to come back to that.
No, go on.
What do you think the UK created racism?
Yeah,
the British Empire.
Not even the British Empire. If we think about we have to always go back to slavery, because that is how how modernity was shaped. And the UK, the UK basically invented race-based slavery. The Home Office tweeted in 2015, we just finished paying off the slave debt. It's crazy. Yeah. The UK is invented slavery, racism basically. But the UK is super racist. The UK is insidiously racist. I'd even say the UK is even more racist than America.
But I feel like don't get mixed up. We're not saying individuals within.
Yeah. No.
That's what we need to distinguish, because I feel like people might get a bit.
Yeah.
I just quickly.
Automatically being attacked.
Yeah, I just quickly want to touch on that UK created racism thing, because I see what you're saying, and obviously it did, in the sense that the first kind of almost mass embodiment of racism was done by the UK and the Empire, and this is where I feel actually is almost the crux of where our worldviews kind of deviate, is that I think that isn't the beginning of it. I think that racism is actually a behavior that has very deep biological roots even, and not necessarily, hear me out, not necessarily race, but racial difference is, it's almost like an expression of difference in in-group and out-group. And in-group versus out-group hostility is something that is absolutely central to all of nature, and it's something that exists in nature. Turn on the nature program for a second, you'll see that things are biologically programmed to favor things that look like themselves and be fearful or even hostile towards things that look differently. So what I'm saying is that is part of nature, that kind of way of looking at things, and that has then developed to be expressed as racism, so I'm not saying racism is innate, but it has biological factors behind it.
That really, really scares me. And it kind of scares me a bit that you keep on talking about biology, because
I'm not advocating. Obviously, it's just because I'm saying it's comes from biology. I'm not saying, that's not me condoning it. Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, of course not. I'm a huge fan of what's the word? Transcending one's biology. I'm a huge fan of taking the things that are biologically in us, such as even aggression, even violence and aggression. If I want someone's things, it's kind of a biological impulse to be all right, I'm going to steal it. And I'm saying we should rise above that. So biology isn't something, I'm not explaining it. I'm just not saying it's biological, therefore it just has to be that way. Absolutely not. I'm saying it needs to be recognized as something that has biological elements in order to be able to transcend it. I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm really scared about that, because that's basically how Hitler sort of rationalized killing millions and millions of Jews. Like it's like nothing is biological. Like race isn't like an actual thing. And like if we had the biological fit, like the biological, there's like a biological thing, like animals. So like tigers would like hate lions, let's say. The idea of like race is tied to other things, which mean that it's like not just biological. It's like hate in like the simplest terms.
I agree. It's not just biological. I agree, but I think there's a biological component under it. And I agree when you say that race isn't biological. I agree. What I'm saying is biological is in-group and out-group psychology, and race is one way in which one could interpret in-group versus out-group.
But
is what I'm saying.
It's not just like in-group, out-group. It's like subjugation. Like it's not.
Yeah.
It's not just like finding something not to your taste. I don't really know about that.
Yeah, no, and again, I'm not saying it's all biology. I'm just saying that I think that's one component worth exploring a little bit.
But I wanted to add, like, how you said that it's natural, and I think it's it can get detrimental when we confuse natural for like right. Like the way that people say it's natural for us to eat meat, but at the same time, we're humans, we have a larger capacity than animals to know that we can eat other things and still survive. In the same way that we know that we can utilize, if there is that in-group, out-group mentality, in a better way. And I think even that in itself is more of an in-group function than an external function, because it comes from stuff like the reason why humans react to babies the way they do, and it's about keeping each other and ourselves protected. So you would think that someone who looks like you is likelier to sympathize with you, because when someone smiles, you smile. When someone's sad, you want to cry. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's the kind of relationship. It's more for internal preservation than external exertion, and I think that's what racism was, and that's why in the 1600s they created race. Right, because you can get white people that are dark, you can get black people, like people from all different countries that are really dark or really light. So like you said, race is literally a completely fabricated concept, purely based on the notion of whether or not you're purely white, which is why it gets confusing when you get out of the category of whiteness and you start looking at Asians, South Asians and stuff like that.
That makes complete sense. And obviously the first statement you said about not confusing natural with right, I completely agree with that. It's very, very dangerous slope when you start saying that just because something might occur naturally in nature, it's right. Absolutely. I'm with you on that.
I guess what I would want to discuss is what can we do moving forward? Because I guess it's really easy to be like, okay, let's disregard certain conversations and move forward. But I feel like we do need to have these conversations and kind of address certain things before moving forward. But like, when does it start to get detrimental? So for example, I saw a video of a young boy hiding behind a van when he saw a police car go by. And my worry is, when does it start to become detrimental and have like a psychological impact on people? So how can we move the conversation forward in a progressive way that's still addressing the things that need to be addressed and also creating like a possibility for the future that we want to live into?
I would say, because you said about the psychological effects, right? I would say that that's already happened. Like there's already kind of like PTSD, not only from like racism, slavery from back in the day, but also like the current climate and how confusing it is for a black like child to grow up in a Western society. Like, because it was, I think, if anyone knows Chidi, I think it's Chidi. What's her name? I think it's Chidi, and she's an author, and she said that it was only when she came to the West that she realized that she was black, and that's because when you're in Africa and everyone's black, it's like, I'm just me. But in the West, it's like another part of your identity that you have to like actually carry around with you. So I think the first thing that we need to do is literally education, but in the most like elevated way. So people need to deeply understand psychology so that we understand why is it that I'm getting triggered when we start talking about racism? Why is it that that little boy hid and stuff like that? And then that way we can talk to each other in a more educated way. Because if I speak to you about my view with a deeper understanding of your view on my view, we can kind of like go like onion layers and go through to the core of the problem. So I think education, and especially psychological education, is like the biggest thing, so that the dialogue between people, like just between us, is deeper.
To directly piggyback off what you're saying, I find what that author said really annoying, because like she probably didn't know that she was black because she was like part of an elite who were like subjugating a lower class in her own country. So I don't think there's any way out of it.
What do you mean? Because there's no racism like the way that we know it in Africa. Like black people don't.
She didn't feel prejudice in her own. She didn't feel prejudice in her own country because she had a privilege of being like, she was probably a wealthier person in her own country, so she didn't feel privileged until she came over here and realized that she that it works different. But she like there is no, Africa's not great. Like the West, like when the Caribbean, the West Indies aren't great. Like that sort of like mindset is really dangerous also, because it's not good over there. Like they're suffering from like the same thing that we're suffering from. I don't think there's any education.
But it's not though. It's relative. Like
it's not relative, because if you're gay in Nigeria, for example,
right,
you could be killed. Like there is no like.
But if you're not,
in the world
but that's different. Well, okay, so
it's not,
you just
it's
gave.
Different.
No. Wait. So you just gave an example based on like say LGBT, right? So can you give me something else that would be, for example, does you being black make it hard for you to get a job in Africa the same way that it would here?
See, because that's the thing that I think we need to get away from. It's not like about, it's not just about race. It's literally about like, so the same reason why race hurts us here is the same reason why being poor in Africa hurts you. Like it's the same struggle. So
right,
regardless of being like a straight black man like I am, going to work in like, I don't know, Trinidad or whatever, or like Ghana, for example, I would have a privilege which is equal amount to like having the privilege of being a straight white man here. Like it's the same sort of capitalist structure which allows me to profit in an African country, but it doesn't allow a gay person in Africa to profit. It's like yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't think there's any, I don't think it's just like a thing of like we can all go back home and it will be okay.
But isn't that more to do with the culture, that like in black culture, it's way more of a stigma than in white culture to be gay? Because I mean, you can even look back even in the Greek history, right? There's more of a history of it being accepted than there is in black history. And I mean, there's such little that we know about black history at all, but I think that's more of a cultural difference.
That's a cultural difference. We have to change them. That's still a prejudice that that needs to be addressed. All I'm saying is like it's never like bad over here in Europe and just good back home. Like that is a thing that we have to stop like spouting, because even like we'll see like people like the diaspora has like this such like wild view of back home, but like you'll hear a lot of people who are actually living back home saying it's not great over here. I don't know why we have these like, you guys think, and it's because we still have that sort of
great in what sense though? I don't
like, for example, you see a lot of people saying on we're going off the topic now, but I'm sorry, we'll hear a lot of people saying like, oh, I'm gonna like work here forever for like 40 years or whatever, amass a wealth and then go back home and like it will be all good. It will be all good for you, but like the person living 20 miles outside of the capital, whatever, is like struggling, and you've literally just plonked that same sort of classist capitalist mind frame and taken it back home, and you're profiting it from it the same way that Boris Johnson or whoever has here. It's never just like, it's really not even just the West created it, but it's not just a Western issue now. It's like the whole world has to like reckon with the society that we live in. It's still like, it's not a Western, African or Caribbean issue. It's like a whole spectrum. We're all like have to change. It's really not just the white people who have to change. It's like everybody. We all have to reckon with like our own privileges and our own I don't know, biases or the way that we live.
And so you see all of that as being attributable to capitalism and just the spread of capitalism.
Yeah, in the broader sense, but like that's not going to change now. So if I was to go back to Camilla's question, but I think now what we all have to do together is like facilitate the next stage, and to facilitate the next stage is to like just like you were saying, educate ourselves, but also not to go back to the same way that we were living. So like, for example, the sort of thing that I talk about a lot is I think about generations. And I've been thinking about a lot about the, so if you talk about Black British generations, so the Windrush generation, for example, who has been in the news for a long time, there was a huge community like thing. It was like community was everything. Everybody helped each other out. There were like things like the Mangrove restaurant where people set it up like, and people went there and everybody was helping each other. And like even when my grandmother came here, like in the 50s or whatever, like I remember when other people used to come here from like Jamaica or whatever, they would like stay in her house for like a year or so, and when they got on their feet they'd like find somewhere to live. I think that is the type of way that we need to, but then when I look at my parents' generation who grew up under Thatcher, which was the sort of like individualist, I need to like get on myself, that's how it's like become so strained that like it's very individual and like no one's helping each other or whatever. It's like I think we need to like skip back to that generation and like change the way we're living now to like make it more of a community effort, which facilitates like in the future for our kids or whatever to like, or grandkids to completely change the world, you know.
If I just make quickly, I think that description of like a really, really vibrant, really loving, compassionate community, I think that's absolutely something to aspire to. The only issue I have is enforcing that through a government.
Oh yeah,
like socialism, like that. That's a good thing. If we can get to that, fantastic. But I feel like it has to be something that people voluntarily shift towards, as opposed to kind of enforcing that kind of thing. But anyway, yeah,
I agree. Yeah.
There is a level of community that has kind of disintegrated for a while now, and we are very quite individualistic. And I would say it's a very basic human thing to think very individualistically, and even to like the furthest we'll go is maybe like our immediate family or the nucleus that we come from, and maybe like some friends, but you know, friends can be disregarded, right? Like that's kind of the mentality that people grow up with. So my question would be, should this be something that's like integrated into school curriculums, like for example personal development within school curriculum, so that individuals are really working on themselves from, I don't know what age would be appropriate, maybe like secondary school or a little bit earlier, so that this isn't such a problem, to have these conversations in a way that's not so like you're right, you're wrong, this is morally correct or morally incorrect, because I feel like what we tend to do is we like to plant like this is wrong and right, this is like ethical and not ethical, like morally. I feel like we do that and not just have open conversation, because not everyone's going to have these conversations at home, right? Not everyone's going to want to educate themselves. So would it be like the middle person of school, the school system, education, at least here in the UK, because not everyone's going to get that all around the world?
Yeah, I think the schools have a real responsibility to help children develop in a way where they can exercise good kind of skills of discussion and everything. And even like this whole conversation, I feel like has been refreshingly atypical. So the fact that I've been able to say things that many people would find outrageous, and instead of kind of taking it kind of with outrage and insulting, you've responded to it with your own kind of reasoning and stuff. And I think that's really healthy. So it's very refreshing to have this kind of conversation. But I feel like that's not that common, at least on social media, because social media is just such a polarizing, kind of intensifying platform that I worry that the kind of skills, Camilla, that you say need to be being taught, I fear that the reverse of them being taught is on social media and stuff. So I think, yeah, schools really need to focus on that.
I think that schools definitely need to focus on having these kind of conversations. I think that not that they were ever aiming or trying, But I think stuff like these kind of things can be implemented definitely, like you were saying, from like secondary school. That's when we need to bring these conversations in. But I think that I just don't see how they can ever do it in the way that you've just kind of described, as like where everyone can bring their viewpoints and it's no right and wrong and there's no political kind of correctness. It won't. I just don't see that being something that is achievable in schools, mainly because that's just how they work. Like the whole political correctness thing is how the whole framework works. I think if a teacher went about and kind of had those open conversations, a kid will probably, like you said, people don't want to have these kind of conversations at home. A kid might go home and then have that, kid might go home and tell their like parents, etc., guardians, like, this is the kind of thing we learned in school today. The parent gets mad, goes back, and then it all gets shut down. It's the kind of thing where because people don't want to have it at home, they don't want to have it in schools too. It's even like with completely different, but like with sex education, parents have the right to kind of like take their child out of that thing, which I think is just wrong. Like there can't be certain things that you exclude your child from because we're all in the same community. Like some parents decide that they don't want to teach their children about the LGBT community. Like you can't like seclude certain things. You can't just like, if you do that, then we're not all going to be able to be on the same page or like even understand each other because people aren't learning. So I just feel like it won't be achievable until everybody is willing to. So although the school is the middle ground, if people don't want to learn about those things at home, then I don't think that they will even allow their children to be part of that kind of topic at school. It won't work.
So would it be... So then what, so what, like, this is where I'm always left with it. So what the hell are we actually meant to do to drive this forward and actually get somewhere? Because, okay, I think about it as, some people have argued that, you know, racism is something that was from a long time ago, and I've just taken it upon myself to research. And I think what a lot of people don't deep is that it really wasn't that long ago. Like, apartheid in South Africa only ended in the early 90s, which is not even 30 years ago. You know, like, what do we do? Like, what can we do as a community?
Yeah, you make a good point. And then I'd probably just say, like, if like we should stop trying to like fix I can keep on going back to this. We should stop trying to like fix whatever system that we live in and just like get rid of it. Like, get rid of it.
Well, on that note, guys, I want to wrap it up. I want to give you guys the floor if anyone wants to say any last things.
Yeah, I just simply reiterate what I said some minutes ago, that it's very refreshing to be able to have an open conversation about these kind of things, because a lot of them are very controversial topics, and yeah, a lot of stuff that usually on social media, wherever, like, you can't really express the same kind of views without kind of hostility then arising. So I thank you for being kind of welcoming and understanding of different viewpoints and stuff, and yeah.
Yeah, I'd piggyback off that also, because like I think that just like the willingness of everybody to like have a discussion says that like a lot has changed anyways, you know. Like, it's like, I think, for example, like when those guys, the like far right guys, were in Westminster like not last weekend, but like a few weekends ago, like, it's very clear that sort of like behavior has like left the mainstream. Everybody's like open to like having discussions like this. So I think there's like, it's like we should like feel positive for the future. I guess what I'm saying.
I wanted to say quickly that this is actually really progressive in itself, because it's dialogue, and it's dialogue that can be controlled by the people, i.e. us. So thanks for having me on. And if I can like leave everyone with anything, it's that I recommend you read a book by someone named Frantz Fanon. And he is someone who lived closer to the history of all these things that we're talking about. And he talks about it from a psychological and psychiatric understanding. And then, yes, it's great for debates.
I just want to say thanks for the opportunity to come on. It's been really interesting hearing everyone's kind of opinions. And again, without any judgment, just being able to sit here and discuss, obviously, matters that are extremely important to all of us. So yeah, it's been progressive conversation.
Amazing. And thank you guys. Thank you so much for sharing everything that you've shared today. It's so important to be able to not only just have this conversation here, but to like give this out to people, and for those who want to listen, it's amazing. So I feel really blessed that we've been able to create this space with one another. So thank you, Zach, Lucas, Nat, and Alfan. So thank you guys so much for being on here, and I think that's pretty much a wrap.
Lovely. So guys,
Right.
take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.